Hello, fellow explorers. For the third time ever, welcome back to Story Spelunking. I'm Sierra.
And I'm Stephanie.
Today, I just want to start us off by saying thank you to everyone who's listened, reviewed, commented, liked, subscribed, downloaded, the whole gambit. This is our first episode recording since we published the first episode, and it really means so much to everyone who's listened.
Yes, I would like to echo the same sentiment. As this is just, something for fun that Sierra and I decided to do. It is great to hear all of your thoughts. And so keep them coming as we continue on this journey exploring, various books, movies, TV series, and, everything in between. And today we will be looking at Netflix's animated series, My Happy Marriage. And since this episode is around Valentine's Day, Sarah, if I'm not mistaken, you have some thoughts about Valentine's Day. Would you like to share them?
I have too many thoughts about Valentine's Day to contain here, but I'm going to try to get to the gist of it. And as you all might be prepared for by now, I'm going to get up on my soapbox. First, happy birthday to my Nan. Valentine's Day is her birthday, which really opened my eyes to the wonders of Valentine's Day. If you're a single person, you may be thinking, oh, this day is so depressing. No, do not rob yourself of the joys of holidays. Okay? Valentine's Day is about all types of love. It's my Nan's birthday. So I love my grandparents. I love my Nan. I love my family. I love my friends. I love chocolate. I love things that are colorful. So I like the pinks and the reds. I love my pets. I love my pets so much that this week I have been doing a lot of gross things in the name of helping my Bernese Mountain Dog heal from surgery. And that's love. And that's
Yes,
Valentine's Day.
I agree because as we speak, I currently actually live abroad and I live in Finland. And in Finland, Valentine's Day is actually celebrated as Friendship Day, which I find very refreshing.
That's what it should be about. Obviously, if you have a boo, you guys should do something special and don't let anyone take that away from you. Some commercialism is good. Get that chocolate, get a teddy bear, hearts, flowers, everything. You guys should do that for each other. But if you don't have someone to do all that for, you shouldn't let love go to waste. You should enjoy the day. And this show we're talking about today, My Happy Marriage, really made me think about it because outside of my role as a Valentine's Day warrior, I love to dress up. I get all done up. I do not have a boyfriend, but I'm out there and I'm just loving love. I'm putting out loving vibes. As I was telling Stephanie, I am a recovering hater. I am leaving my hater era behind me, just like
Mhm.
I'm leaving the word era, trying to. And I'm becoming a lover. I'm learning to love life. I love love. I'm loving. We're in a loving time.
I
So
can tell.
we're being positive. I'm a
Yes.
reformed hater. And my happy marriage really brought this philosophy I'm developing to mine. At one point, an older woman in the show named Yuri says, a woman builds confidence by being loved, which slay. But also, I think this is true not just about women. And I think you can go further than that and say that humans build confidence by loving others as well.
Exactly. And I think you have a legitimate soapbox to be on, as too much of Valentine's Day, at least like on social media, you always see, oh, it's, single awareness day. And like, that's just, there's no, we need to have joy in life. And single, let's be honest, being single is not that bad. There are some perks. I mean, I can do whatever I want to do because it's just me.
Why would you rob yourself of a chance to celebrate? We see so much stuff that's really depressing and sad in life. Why would we reject a gift? Take the joy, take the celebration, you know what? Show yourself some love. I think self-love as a concept is a little overdone, but why not go out, get yourself a treat? I'm the biggest proponent of getting yourself a treat. Get yourself a
Especially if it's
special,
an iced latte.
an iced latte, get yourself a special little latte, a matcha, go to Sonic for crying out loud, and then come home and just do something. You don't even have to spend money. Just have a special day and take an Epsom salt bath, girl or guy. Maybe your muscles and joints hurt. treat yourself on Valentine's Day with some anti-inflammation.
Sounds like a plan. And well, I guess we must move on. Are you fully satisfied or do you
I
want to
am. I'll
continue
climb
on?
down.
Okay,
If there's
now
not a
that
soapbox,
yeah,
I will build one.
yes. And now that Sierra has gotten off her soapbox, we are going to go to My Happy Marriage, which briefly speaking, it's I would describe it as a romantic historical fantasy set in early 20th century Japan.
I think that's a good
And
descriptor.
yeah, and if we were to give the Netflix summary, is that Mio's abusive family deems her worthless, but together with her powerful husband to be, her true self and hidden powers slowly begin to shine.
I think that anyone can enjoy this show. It's like our C.S. Lewis quote from the original episode, like a good story can be enjoyed by everyone, but My Happy Marriage is for the girls. It's for the girlies.
Yes, and some of our listeners who like grew up with me would be quite shocked that I actually consumed this piece of media because I am not known for my love of romance. But I think this story has so many redeeming qualities that I was able to enjoy it, even though it's not my typical genre.
I think that is the beauty of a Cinderella story arc, which we're definitely going to get into today. It's romantic for the girlies. And you know what? Some guys can enjoy romance too. Romance is a two people affair. But the story itself, the story of a Cinderella arc, is enjoyable by everyone.
Mm-hmm. In many ways, it's timeless. Like if you think about how many iterations there have been of the Cinderella story from hundreds of years ago, and then probably the most famous would be, more recently, it was like the first, I believe in the 1950s is when
Yeah.
Disney's Cinderella movie came out, but there's stories, it obviously predates that. And then, of course, one of your favorite movies.
Cinderella 2015, one of perhaps the only good Disney live action remake, and one of the best movies of all time.
Yes, which we will definitely go into live action adaptations at some point because that is a conversation that needs to happen. But yeah, so in essence, this is kind of a Cinderella story or Cinderella themed story set in Japan. And I guess we could probably divide it into two general arcs. It's 12 episodes, so I mean you can consume it pretty quickly. But we'll do like the first six where we look at kind of the first arc. But when it first starts, like I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit hard to watch in some ways because her family is absolutely the worst. It makes Cinderella in the animated movie, it makes her family look like saints.
You know, there are those characters that you love to hate. This is almost love to hate, but they're so awful that it creeps towards hate to hate them.
Yes, like it's not just that they treat her horribly, but they're also, I like to say, maliciously manipulative. I was very happy about that wordplay. But anyway, like it's not just that they, the way they treat her like a servant, even though that is her father. Her mother dies, like obviously in the Cinderella story, and so she has her stepmother and her half sister. But yeah, a couple times, like I don't know how I would have survived in that environment.
It's also interesting because their dad doesn't have a son, which at the time, the cultural context, having a son would have been very important. So she's the eldest of the family. She's the eldest daughter, but her father, who, unlike the traditional Cinderella story, this is a stepmother, her biological father, and a half sister.
Yeah.
They overlook her, the oldest child, in favor of her half sister, who is younger.
Yeah, because I guess we should mention there is like a supernatural twist that people have abilities in this world, and it appears at the beginning that Mio does not have any supernatural abilities, while her sister does, and I think that just exacerbates the way that they treat her. They see her as worthless, and they are very vocal about telling her that she's worthless, and so she grows up after her mother dies, just hearing that she's worthless and that she's a burden, and this is going to have huge psychological damage on her as the story continues.
There's also the element that her father was in love with the stepmom before he was forced into an arranged marriage with her mom. So her sister Kaya, is a child of a loving union, like the stepmom and her father love each other, whereas Mio's mother was a forced arranged marriage. It's sort of a Charles, Diana, Camilla situation.
That's a fun comparison. Yeah, and I think also what makes this story interesting for me too was it kind of gives insight into the way it was in Japan at this time with the arranged marriages. Like everything was about, family dynamics, and especially with this, they add the supernatural element, and so there's this power struggle with which family has the greatest abilities, and then the emperor's involved, and so there's that added layer to the story. Just like in real life, arranged marriages were a way for families to gain more power. This story has the added element.
What I like about a Cinderella retelling is when they add something to the story. I feel like a lot of retellings, I don't need you to retell me the same story as it
Mm-hmm.
was. I know that story.
Yeah.
I want something meaningful added. And I think the powers really add something. And the relationship dynamics are also more complex because this is a television show, not a movie.
Yeah.
It's also not strictly aimed for children. I actually don't think it's aimed for children at all. There are some
Yeah.
intense themes. But before she gets with Prince Charming archetype, if you will, she has a childhood friend who is the second son of another powerful family. And his name is Koji. And it's clear from the get-go that he really likes her and wants to help her. And it gets complicated as the show goes on. And I would encourage you to watch it. He likes her and sees her as a romantic partner and wants to help her. But I don't know that she necessarily sees him as her first love or a love interest at all. But he represents her way out of the situation she's in.
Yeah. And just to prove that her family is at the absolute worst, is they arrange a marriage between Koji and her sister, her half sister Kaya. And Kaya, of course, knows that Koji has feelings for Mio, and so she sees this as kind of I don't know, another way to manipulate and make Mio's life miserable. And yeah, that I think is for me, it's the manipulativeness, if that's a word, of her family that just it makes them worse than other Cinderella stories.
Her family is evil. They, like you say, evil stepmother in the original Cinderella story because she is evil in the original Cinderella story. I don't want to cut that short. They explore more of the abusive element in this story, though, which is what's hard to watch at times. Her family is not just indifferent to her, they don't just favor Kaya, her sister. They are outright cruel physically, emotionally, and mentally. She's living as a servant in their house,
Mm.
Cinderella. Just like Cinderella, her clothes are rags, but they, when they engage her sister to the guy who has a crush on her, say they're going to marry her off to the Kudo family.
Mm.
And the heir to that family, his name is Kyoka Kudo, but we're going to call him Kudo going forward, just for the
Yes,
sake of
because
simplicity.
I also, as you probably will find out, I really struggle with pronunciations. So whichever one I can say consistently the same way is the one we're probably going to go with. So I apologize in advance for all my mispronunciations. And I do try to work at it, but inevitably, it
That's
just,
okay. We're here to learn, and if you can correct us, please do so in the comments. But Kudo has a reputation of being very cruel and cold to the fiancés he's had. He's chased them all off. His family's powerful, but even more than that, her father really doesn't care that her fiance has a bad reputation. He just kind of wants her as a power play and doesn't want to think about her anymore.
yeah, it's their way of just getting rid of her in a way. And yeah, it's not, I mean, this is going to backfire on them as we see, but they don't do it out of any sense of love or trying to make her life better. That is not their motive at all.
They even, she wears rags, like I mentioned, because she's a servant in her father's house, which the implications of that, if you think about it, they finally give her a nice kimono to send her off to her fiance just so she looks like she's supposed to as the daughter of a prominent family, not because they want her going forward with nice things or any kind of confidence or to feel loved by her family. They just want her to appear that way to Kudo.
Yeah, and even notice when they just tell her, okay, tomorrow you're going to be married off to this guy. And she has to pack up what little she does have, which is not much. And she makes the journey alone, which if I'm not the most familiar with Japanese culture, but I don't think it was very normal for a woman to travel by herself. Like for me, you see her do this whole no one says goodbye to her. Like she just leaves the house by herself, goes into the town, like takes because it is a little bit of a journey to get to the Kudo's house. And I think that just is another way that this story, the way they tell it, it's good storytelling principles because many things they show you without telling you. They don't just exposition dump that oh her family's horrible. They show it, and that's a much more powerful storytelling tool.
I completely agree. Although this moment when she leaves and they don't care for her safety and send her off with nothing feels like a negative in the moment, and it definitely shows us that they don't care about her, but it's also the best thing that could have ever happened to her. She
Yeah.
shows up at this house, and this is why the show is so for the girlies. When
I may or may not have rolled my eyes when the sequence happened. I'm like, of course, but
she sees him for the first time and immediately stops moping and starts just spouting poetry. And I'm gonna have Stephanie read that because she's the one who wrote it down.
yes, I did write it down. But I was like, this because sometimes I feel like this show, for the most part, does a great job of avoiding like typical tropes. But in this moment, he slowly turns around and like he is obviously good looking, but her inner monologue is this is what she tells herself. From the moment I saw him, I felt something shift. What was once a dark space in my life has a sliver of light, a flower, so small, blossoming through the snow. What a beautiful person.
I love the cheesiness. I love that she is so her breath is taken away, and the only thing she can think is, I need to do some poetry real quick.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's how episode one comes to an end in this very, dramatic turn. Um,
As I might say when I'm not trying to speak clearly, that is so tea.
yeah.
That is simply so tea. He does not have the butterflies quite as fast as her.
No.
In fact, she makes him breakfast because this is going to come up over and over again as she grows as a character. But she feels the need to make herself indispensable so that people can't just get rid of her.
Mhm.
She needs to be working hard, valued. That's what gives her safety. So she pops right up early in the morning and starts making this man's breakfast. And he's like, I'm not going to eat that. You might have poisoned me.
Yeah. Which I mean, in partially in Kudo's defense, he is a high-ranking member of the military and from one of the most powerful families in Japan. So he has a little bit of um there's some legitimacy behind him, but he definitely overreacts and it is the hit. But I think in the moment once he realizes what he has done, he also doesn't know her that well. And he makes assumptions that because she comes from a prominent family, she grew up, pampered and like all the other fiancés that he had been arranged with that, ended up leaving.
It's really, that moment's actually really nice because he reacts like that to chase off her, like you said, like he did his previous fiancés. But he's actually, and you brought up this exact verbiage, very emotionally intelligent. And he and his housekeeper Yuri pick up almost immediately that Mio is extremely traumatized. They switch gears from trying to run her off or just like figure out what her deal is to wanting to take care of her. At the end of that episode, he he lets her cook for him and actually eats
Yeah.
it, and he tells her it's good and just shows her that he values her contribution. And that is so impactful to her that she bursts into tears.
Yeah, and he doesn't know how to react. And then in her monologue, she's like she basically says, I can't remember the last time someone complimented me.
That is so sad.
Yeah, and then I think obviously another thing this story does really well is I feel like it paints a pretty accurate picture of the ups and downs of recovery from trauma because a lot of series and they just kind of brush over it and it's like this simple upward progression whereas we all know in life that's not the case. But I do think a key moment is I believe it's a few scenes later when Kudo tells her, I'm the one who wanted you here. And she had never been wanted before in her life. And to hear that from him starts the long road to recovery.
I think that's the sweetest part of this story and something that's not that deeply explored in a lot of Cinderella stories. He really cares about her recovering from what she's been through at her family of origins home, at her father's home. He gives her the freedom and the safety to be honest about her feelings, honest about her contributions, honest about what she wants, and shows her that he's not going to kick her out just because she does something that's slightly annoying or inconvenient.
Yeah. So that's what I think another reason I don't want to keep, gushing over too much over this show, but I do think it does stand apart from the typical Cinderella story. So while we're kind of using that as a, I don't know, starting point or a theme for this episode, it really is a lot more to it.
I completely agree. When I was reading the Reddits about the episodes, that's embarrassing. I know a lot of people were annoyed about her wishy-washiness sometimes, or what they perceive to be wishy-washiness. But I think that is actually very accurate to real life. A lot of stories don't want to explore this because it risks making characters annoying. And a lot of times you don't want to read about annoying characters. I can't
Yeah.
blame anyone. You got finite time on the earth, finite free time. But I actually really love that because, of course, she doesn't trust him from the jump. She's never been able to trust anyone.
Yeah, and the wishy-washy you just mentioned, I think in many ways it's a defensive mechanism that she has developed after years of verbal and physical abuse.
I thought there's another scene later where I will probably bring this back up. There are three main types of trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze. But there's a lot of talk about a fourth, which is fawning. And this is the definition per Google. The fawn response is a trauma response where a person behaves in a people-pleasing way to avoid conflict and perceived danger. It's a coping mechanism that can develop after experiencing childhood trauma, such as abuse or interpersonal violence. And some of the behaviors that come with fawning are people-pleasing, ignoring needs, difficulty saying no, hypervigilance, suppressing emotions, and dissociating. I think a
Yeah.
lot of the behavior we see Mio fall into is fawning.
Yeah, and I think that shows too that I'm not sure I should have looked it up. I didn't look up the authors because this is based off a light novel,
I believe so.
but I think they did their research because that exactly encapsulates much of what character traits she exhibits, especially in the first half of the series.
And I think we can attribute all of this annoying behavior, if you want to call it annoying. I would not. I'm like, girl, you kind of got to do what you got to do to survive. This is her dad's fault.
Yes, if I had to pick my least favorite character or who I believe is the worst character, I mean he's well written. I mean like behavioral wise, or who I attribute most of the problem to is her biological father because he doesn't love her. He lets his or her stepmother do whatever she wants. He coddles her half sister, and sometimes he just doesn't care, which honestly is just as bad.
I completely agree. I think the apathy about everything to do with her is almost worse. I mean, her sister and stepmom are evil and responsible for their own actions. But do not mistake us. But something about her dad, who is I mean, we both got great dads. Your dad is meant
Yes.
to protect you, meant to give you the love that builds confidence, that
Yeah.
sends you out into the world and empowers you to do things. Her dad could not care any less about what happened to her.
Yeah. In this, I wrote this one quote down. He was talking to Koji's father, and Koji's father is also horrible because they're kind of in cahoots together. And Mio is actually doing really well at with the kudos, and like they actually like are they went on their first date and blah blah blah. And so Koji's father comes over, in a rage because this was not supposed to happen. Mio's father's reaction is, "Yes, I've all but abandoned her anyway. I've no interest in where she is or how she's surviving, whether she's alive or if she's dead." I can't like, I can't imagine a father saying that.
There's another quote during a flashback where he's talking to Mio's mother before she died, and he says, "If we were a mediocre family without supernatural abilities, perhaps I could have loved Mio."
That's horrible. But
I,
yeah,
in my notes, I wrote down, "Her stupid and evil dad."
I mean, you're not wrong.
Not only is he apathetic, he is just not keeping up. Like, Koji's dad is running circles around him. He's
Yeah.
manipulating Kaya, which is her sister. They're doing things all right under her dad's nose. And her dad, what is he doing with his day?
I don't know. Their family isn't that like he doesn't have that important of a job. At least I don't get that, from the story. But yeah, like when Kaya and her mom kidnap Mio, and then you know Kudo comes to rescue her, and he comes out of the house. He's like, "What is going on?" Like, shouldn't you know?
Nope, he spends his whole days being stupid and evil.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a little bit ahead of us. But there's so
Yes.
much to talk about in this show.
Our favorite part is obviously, I said our, not favorite. I have a favorite scene that comes up later, but our favorite character, I think I'm safe to say, is Kudo.
Yes, 100%. And like we've already mentioned, like he shows a level of emotional intelligence and maturity that you want to see in a character. Like for example, he listens to advice from, the servant in the house, Yuri, I think, and when he takes Mio out into town and gets new I can never say this word.
Kimono.
Komodo. I always want to say Komodo. So, anyway, he goes to the store that makes those, and the dresser, the lady who makes them, tells him that Mio is a gemstone in the rough. Only with care and polish can those stones ever shine.
I love this. His emotional intelligence leads into one of, I think, the most romantic thing about this story is the gentleness of it, the care that he takes with her, the patience. She is not someone who could have had a quick burn romance, an insta love,
Yeah,
as you might say in publishing. It's it's that he is willing to put in the time for her to heal, to listen and to listen to the things that she doesn't say, to
yeah.
truly love her.
And he also realizes pretty quickly on that because he starts giving her gifts, which obviously there's a tradition and there's meaning behind these gifts in the culture of like the wedding traditions. But he also realized that those gifts are not going to heal. She has very deep scars. And I think what another beautiful moment in this series is when he goes and finds, well, because he was in the military, like he has connections, and he finds Hana, who was the only person in Mio's home that she grew up that defended her. And he gets her to go and have like a little luncheon with Mio.
It reminds me of Cinderella 2015, their conversation that they have, because the main theme in Cinderella 2015, and perhaps the heartbeat of a Cinderella story arc as a whole, is have courage and be kind. Seeing Hana just gives her the reminder that she's survived this far and that she should continue to survive in a way that doesn't harden her or numb her. I think the fawning lends itself a lot more towards numbing than becoming cruel. But anyone in her circumstances could have come out cruel and unfeeling. But instead, she has the courage to continue to feel, to continue to be kind.
Yeah, exactly. And not to beat a proverbial dead horse, but we once again find or are confronted with her father being the worst. When Kudo, obviously he figures out, pretty quickly that Mio's home situation was not great based on the way she acts. So he actually goes and confronts her father, and he just basically asks them to apologize to Mio for how they treated her. And her father says he has to think about it.
He agrees. He doesn't even want to pay like a bride price anymore, understandably. And that is, I'm willing to beat this dead horse for another hour, but for the sake of everyone, including you, Stephanie, I will not do that. He says that he's marrying her either way, but he will pay the bride price, even though he doesn't want to, if they apologize. And her dad's like, I don't know. This is infuriating.
It is very infuriating. And then behind the scenes, because he doesn't know what's going on, Kaya and Koji's father have come up with a scheme, and they're going to try and force Mio to end the engagement. And
It
so they kidnap her.
it makes sense that a stupid and evil father would manage to raise at least one a stupid and evil daughter. This scene, this is gonna sound bad. Sometimes I like a little kidnapping and rescue arc in a story with romance in it. It's fun, but this one is so crazy. I'll preserve the scene, so if you go watch, as you should, you can see it. But Miss Ma'am gets Liam Neeson taken right out the street. So after the kidnapping, we of course get an amazing rescue.
Yes, and the visuals again in the series, they're beautiful. Like there's so many shots that could easily be like a backdrop for a painting or something. But it was so satisfying to see them all get what they deserve. Because I think that is the benefit too of this being a series as opposed to a movie, because you're allowed time to build. I mean, these episodes are only 25 minutes, I think, but I think it helps build, and then there's the payoff, because it's always easy to build a story, but it's really hard to get the payoff. And I think this does pay off very well.
I think so too. It is so satisfying to see her whole family and her friends' family, Koji's family, get what they deserve because they have always treated her horrible. And now she has someone who is in her corner and has the power to fight for her.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this before, but this series does a great job of showing you without telling you. Because early on, Koji goes and confronts his father, and he can't do anything. He tries to use his supernatural abilities, and his father, without breaking a sweat, puts him in his place, and he can't do anything. So you see how powerful Koji's father is. And then Koji, to his credit, realizes he needs backup, and he needs someone who can actually protect Mio. So he goes and gets Kudo. And Kudo has some great lines in this episode. You see how powerful he actually is, because you had just been demonstrated. Koji's father's skills had just been demonstrated, but then you see it in comparison with Kudo's, and they're not even in the same ballpark. And he has this line where he's like, "You're in my way. Now move."
It's so good. It's one of the more, their romance is so gentle and patient and kind and wonderful. But then you get these scenes where he's like busting in to rescue her, and it's a good juxtaposition, a good
Mhm.
balance.
And I
But
think that's what makes him a good male protagonist, because he's he's both masculine, but he's not this toxic man who always all rough and tumble. Like he has those moments when he needs to be that way, but then he is so gentle and kind with Mio on the other hand. So it is a very good character, and I think something that is often missing in a lot of media that we now see.
he's a good example of meek but not weak. And
Exactly.
it's strong to care about the people around you. It's not weak to be able to care for other people's emotions.
Hmm.
And while he's busting there to the rescue, Mio is being horrifically tortured by her stepmother and half sister. And I'm not talking they locked her in the attic and tried to convince the prince it was them at the ball. Her sister has taken gardening shears to her neck.
Hmm.
They are beating her with a fan. Her stepmom is
Was
kicking her in the face. Her sister is strangling her with her bare hands. And
sorry, I should not be laughing. It was just the way you said fan. I'm sorry.
well, I'm just, if you can get the vision, one of those, you know what I'm talking about. And there's just,
Yes.
it's folded up and she's beating her. And you're just like, this is crazy for this type of story. And
Yes.
she can't fight back. Her hands are tied up. And they are not only physically beating her, they're berating her mentally.
Hmm.
And she would have folded so quickly at
Yeah.
the beginning of the series. They're, I haven't even explained what they're doing. They want her to break up with her fiance so that her sister can get with him instead because her sister
Yes.
wants him,
Yep.
like a toddler.
Exactly. Because she is mad. She's extremely angry. Like, how dare Mio find happiness? This show does a really good job of warning you against where envy and jealousy can take you. Because I don't think Kaya initially intended to take it this far. Maybe she did. Maybe I'm being too naive. But envy and jealousy lead to dark paths that, you probably would have never envisioned yourself on.
Mio's happiness doesn't have any effect on Kaya's life. If they had just left her alone, they would have been fine. But like you're saying, her envy forced her to covet what her sister had. Her sister can't have anything better than her, even though her life would have been perfectly nice.
Yeah.
But what this does is show us how far Mio has already grown in the first half of the season because instead of folding, she finds her confidence and she is willing to stand up to this torture for his sake, not her own, because she loves the life that she has with him. It's like that Yuri quote that I started us with. His loving her has given her confidence, and she tells them, I'll never surrender to you. For my husband to be who believes in me, I'll stand my ground. It's his belief in her that empowers her to grow. She
Yeah,
can't do it for herself yet,
yeah,
but
she's not quite
first
there
step.
yet. But yeah, this is a huge step. And I think it's a great juxtaposition between how you when you first meet her in the episode, the beginning, and then this where she stands her ground. She refuses to call off the engagement. Eventually Kudo gets there and Kaya is, trying to she actually doesn't even defend. When he opens the door, she is literally choking Mio with her bare hands. And when he intervenes, she doesn't even attempt to she doesn't even know. I don't know how to describe this. Like, she doesn't even realize what she's doing, I don't think. And she immediately is like, well, you should be with me, not her. And he tells her to stop her putrid drivel. And I
She
thought that was,
believes her
yeah.
own hype so much that she's like, duh, I'm strangling my sister. Be with me. I'm awesome.
Yeah. And obviously, she bears a lot of responsibility for her own actions. But part of this is the fault of her parents because she has been told her whole life that she is better, that she is the best, and that's going to affect your psyche.
The results of gentle parenting. For legal reasons, that's a joke.
Yes, it's just a joke. But anyway, this is just an incredible scene. The score, I can't talk about a series without talking about the score, and it's absolutely beautiful. Most of the score is based on a piano melody. The composer does a great job of telling the story. If you were just listening to the score, you could probably, tell the ebb and flow of what's going on based on the tone and the rhythm of the piano.
I think that's animation. I'm sure we touched on this in Anastasia, is such a beautiful medium for storytelling because you can do things visually that you can't do with real people in real life. Then you tie that together with the scoring and the voice acting. I feel like people put a lot more emotion into voice acting, which is one of the reasons like people think anime is silly. I actually really like the dramatics. I think it can add a lot. the beautiful art in the background, like you pointed out earlier, it almost looks like a painting at times. I think animation is like an elevated art form, if you will.
I don't know if we want to talk about here. Do we prefer sub or dub? I normally prefer subtitles because I don't know. I think not to be harsh on the English voice actors, but I think it comes across better in Japanese. I don't know.
Maybe it sounds just as silly and dramatic to Japanese people as the English dubs sound to us. But there is just a silliness to a lot of English dubs of anime that subtitle doesn't have. I
Yeah.
used to be really hardline about only watching subtitled anime when I was like a young teenager. But when I was watching Attack on Titan with my brothers, they were coming home from long days of hard labor, construction, school, work, football, and they
Yeah.
didn't want to read and listen to Japanese people speak. And then I started being like, I just want them to watch this story with
Yeah.
me. So I'm going to make my peace with dub. I prefer subtitles, but
Same.
if you got to watch dub to watch the story, it's worth it consuming the story most of the time.
Yeah, and I met, and I think it's gotten much better in the past couple of years, especially as anime has become arguably more mainstream. And I think sometimes some of the studios even will match up the mouth movements to English dubbing.
That's usually the strategy is they translate it as close to the original as possible, but while also matching it to the movements of the mouth.
Well, now that we got that, we go back to the story. But this is an interesting side note when it comes to anime in general. But I think you mentioned a really good point when we were, prepping for this, that after this happens and they return home, Kudo gives her actually a really important gift, even though it's actually it's not a physical gift when he,
I think this is so important. There's a lot, you could do a whole episode on the psychological ramifications of this series. She has been a victim of such horrible abuse, and he gives her the gift that this type of survival deserves. He looks at her and he tells her, it's not your fault. You're not to blame. That's what she's needed to hear her whole life.
yeah, she's always been told it's your fault, your burden, nobody wants you. And now she has someone who wants her, and he tells her like this kidnapping is not your fault. She blames herself, and she shouldn't. And it's also, again, please watch the series because we are not doing it justice in many ways to describing some of these scenes and the dialogue between them and the score. It's quite a beautiful series, even though it does touch on dark themes. They are handled, I think, in a very mature way.
And I think we can't shy away from themes like this because this stuff happens in real life. Not in this manner, not because you don't have supernatural abilities, but in one way, it can help people feel seen because you're seeing an experience like your own on the screen. And then on the other hand, it can teach, I feel like empathy is such a buzzword, but in this case, it can teach
Yeah.
compassion. You can sometimes consume concepts better as a story than you can in real
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, and not to discourage anyone from watching this series, as we know, we are talking about some fairly heavy themes. There are lighthearted moments in the series. It's not all about dealing and confronting trauma, but as the story, there's all these different things going on, and it turns out that Mio is actually from quite a powerful family, and she does, shocker, have supernatural abilities, and they're very powerful and very coveted abilities. And so this brings up some drama, and her family, her mom's side of the family, I should say, discovers where she is, and her cousin, well, they don't know that he is her cousin. He goes and talks to Kudo because he works for the emperor and stuff, and he's making trying to make small talk with Kudo, and he tells him that he's surprised that he now has a fiance because he has this reputation of being unapproachable and cold as frozen tundra. And Kudo's response is, "I have no need of such intel," and that just made me laugh out loud. because he still is a fairly, at least especially to when he's out in his job, and he does kind of come across as a bit stiff.
I think that's what makes his kindness towards her so much more impactful, is because he is very stoic in every other part of his life.
And I think the average person, we can all relate to that to somewhat, because we have like our work persona, if you will. That sounds kind of like we're making, but we all like, when I worked as a teacher's assistant, like I definitely carried myself differently when I was in front of the class teaching than when I was at home. And I think it's just funny because I think you were saying that one of your favorite scenes, which is not one of mine, is when she's wears, because this is a part in Japanese history where you see this blending of Japanese culture and dress and this influence of the Western cultures, because Japan had just opened to the West not that long before this story is set.
When she first wears Western clothing, now this is going to sound insensitive. All of her kimonos are absolutely gorgeous. And as we established in Anastasia, I am a costume girly. I guess it's not a costume because it's animated, but you know what I mean. The
Yes.
outfits, the kimonos are gorgeous. I like seeing the juxtaposition between the Western dress and the traditional dress. But when
Yeah.
she wears a Western dress for the first time, it's just like that scene in Anastasia when Anastasia, or Anya at the time,
Yeah.
wears a dress for the first time on the boat.
Mm.
It gets the exact same reaction from both the girl and the guy in the situation.
Yes. Yeah, it was a great moment.
It kind of leads us into our second arc, which is there's more going on in this one. Kudo's sister comes and she's gonna train Mio to be a lady.
Yeah.
It's also confronting for Mio because his sister asks Mio to call her name's Hazuki, but I'm just gonna say his sister. She asked Mio to call her big sister, but because that's what Kaya, her sister, called her when they were torturing her and her whole life, she can't even stomach hearing big sister. And it's a very, another word I think is therapy language in general, I think gets thrown about a lot and overused to the point of watering things down, but it's a real trigger for her.
Hmm. Yeah, and not to obviously distract from her real trauma with her sister, as I am the little sister in my family, and shout out to my sister. I love you. This is obviously just I have some big sister trauma, if you will, because inevitably there's a large age gap between us. And so she was often my babysitter. I mean, I knew how to push her buttons too, so it wasn't entirely her fault, but we had we have some stories about stuff that happened between us, as any, like, it's just simple sibling behavior. Obviously not near, I'm not, comparing it at all to what.
I get what you're saying. We'll have to let your sister know you were saying that she tortured you as a child.
No, we will lose a subscriber.
Oh, no. Outside of sister things, Mio is dealing with some other ramifications of her life. She's fawning, as I said. She is keeping all of her feelings to herself. She is the maximum people pleaser. She never wants to seem like a burden of any kind
Yeah.
because she sees that as a threat to her safety. So she starts going through some supernatural shenanigans and having terrible, terrible nightmares. And it's driving a wedge between them because she's working herself to the bone to be a lady,
Yeah.
and she's also having these nightmares, so she's not sleeping well. It's causing her to swoon in the street like Scarlett O'Hara. And he's busy because there's some supernatural drama that doesn't have to do with her going on in the kingdom of Japan.
Yeah.
So, but they finally get a moment alone, and he sits down and he tells her that he won't understand her feelings if she doesn't tell them to him. He can't read her mind. He's being very honest.
Yeah.
It's just difficult for her to be vulnerable, to feel like she needs anyone. She thinks, but doesn't tell him, that telling him her feelings makes her a burden.
Yeah.
He's open to hearing them, but she doesn't want to share them.
Yeah, I don't think she's quite ready.
I don't think so either.
And then I think his frustrations with her, because clearly something is going on. Like he's not stupid and he can see that she's not doing well, but he cannot get her to open up to him. So in an understandable moment of humanity, he raises his voice and kind of, loses his temper, if you will, that, please, I want to help you. This is kind of the final straw moment if in her building power, and so she collapses and he has to take her to her mother's side of the family and to her grandfather.
This buildup leads us into a moment that has been of great debate, both online and in my personal life with Bestie Abigail when we were watching it the first time. And Stephanie, you and I also, we didn't quite have a conflict about it because I think I said something to you as soon as it
Yeah.
happened. But when Abigail and I watched, shout out Abigail, we did not realize there was a discrepancy. There is a big battle between her cousin, a duel,
Yes, which
and
he cheats in. I will forever
Kudo about
yeah, defend Kudo.
who keeps custody of this adult woman.
Yeah.
Whether she stays with her family, which protects her as her powers grow, or whether she stays with her fiance, who is her fiance.
Yeah.
They ask her, right before the battle, this is what causes the battle actually.
Yeah.
They turn to her, and this is in episode 9, I believe.
Or it's 10.
Okay, it's episode 10 at the 8-minute 30-second mark. And I tell you this, so if you have a Netflix account, you will know when you get to this point. They asked her what she wants to do. And in some versions of Netflix, she says, I don't know. This is my
And
version.
and in my version, she says, I don't care.
The implications of this are crazy.
This complete like you and I had a very different viewing experience because there's a big difference between I don't know and I don't care.
I don't,
And
it just
I
comes off
I
a lot crueler if she says,
yeah,
I don't
so
care.
I when she said that, I was like, ouch. Like poor Kudo. Like after all he's done and she says, I don't care.
Either way, I see it as she's very overwhelmed and this is her worst nightmare because of the way she was raised. But I agree that saying, I don't know because you're overwhelmed about whether you want to stay with these strangers or go home with your fiance versus saying, I don't care. That's not how she says it.
Yeah.
And that's all, that's another little bit of a problem you can sometimes have with anime is there can be translation differences depending on where you watch it, and sometimes, as in this case, even if you watch it on the same platform.
I wonder because obviously I'm in Finland, so my VPN is different. So I wonder if it's partially dependent on where you are. Who knows? I don't know.
That
But
is curious.
yeah, because I mean sometimes there's, kind of funny mistranslations that are like, ah, that's funny. But this one is a problematic translation issue.
This is a very big issue because either way, it hurts Kudo a lot that they've had all this build up together, this history, and then she's like, I don't know. But it's way worse if she says, I don't care.
Mhm.
And that is what sparks the battle between her cousin and Kudo because they're like, well, if she can't decide, we'll battle to figure out where she's going to be.
Yeah. And it's a pretty epic showdown. I mean, it's not the most thrilling anime battle because obviously there's other ones, but I think it does a pretty good job. But then her cousin, I won't spoil it, but he kind of cheats. So Kudo loses. And then he goes home. Well, he doesn't go home, he gets sent home actually. And you noted the interaction between him and his sister.
His sister has to break it down for him because, as emotionally intelligent as he is still a dumb boy. And sometimes they just miss stuff. His sister is like, I think she even smacks him with a newspaper or something. And
Yeah.
she says she wanted to be needed by you because the thing that he said in his fit of temper, which was just basically worrying for her,
Yeah.
was, I should never have let you study to become a lady.
Mhm.
But that was her, that was like psyche breaking her because what she wants is to be indispensable to him,
Yeah.
for him never to have a reason to get rid of her. And so his sister has to knock some sense into him.
Yeah, as sisters are very good at doing. My sister has helped me a lot as to grow as a human, and she's more than willing to point out my flaws, which is a good thing. You need someone.
He winds up not being able to rescue her right now because
Yeah.
the nation is in trouble. He's got to go help fight off. They're called grotesqueries. It's giving ghost. It's giving ghost vibes.
Yeah.
He has to go fight those. And she's days are passing and she's with her grandfather and her cousin,
Hmm.
who it's hard to feel positively about because
Yeah.
they only came after her when it started becoming clear she had a power.
Yeah.
They didn't really care when she was just herself, which Kudo does care about. But her grandfather is sharing his regrets about cutting contact with her mother, who left the family to save the family
Yeah.
against her grandfather's wishes. And as they're having a heart to heart about it, her grandfather tells Mio about her mom. I cared for her more than I felt it was unforgivable, talking about her leaving. So he tells her that he cares about her more than the issue was unforgivable, showing that
Mm.
that's possible in love. Then Kudo gets hurt. It's a dark day for the girls.
Yeah.
It turns out that Mio is the only one who can save him. This is just what we've been waiting for. So she has to get out of her mind and into his mind to
Hmm.
push the grotesqueries out.
Yeah.
And to do so, she has, in a therapist's dream moment, to confront herself
Yeah.
in order to get out of her head to save him. And this moment is my absolute favorite moment of the entire show. If you've ever been to a therapist, a trauma therapist, they talk a lot about confronting your little self, forgiving your little self, taking care of your little self.
Hmm.
This is her little self moment. Herself, I wrote her evil self in my notes, but her self
Yeah.
tells her all of this ugly stuff about the way she survived, about the way she was.
Hmm.
It tells her you hurt his feelings so you wouldn't get hurt. Because that's just her self-protection is feel
Yeah.
nothing, push everyone away. And then hearkening back to what her grandfather said, she says, that's why I'm going to apologize.
This scene is absolutely amazing. I think it's really interesting because the a lot of times in life you have in order to move on and to grow, you often have to confront your past. And it doesn't have to be some, big trauma like in Mio's case. It can just be, simple things that have happened to you in the past. It's great visual storytelling as well. Like it's hard to really describe the scene. Again, go watch it. And then once she is able to, to confront her past, then she's able to help Kudo. So she takes the next step because before, when she was being tortured, she did it for him, but now in many ways she's doing this for her. And I just was hit with the thought of it's amazing how one having another person believe in you is quite empowering, and it often just takes one person.
I think we first get that empowering, well, we're supposed to get that empowering love from our parents. That's the stepping stones to going out there, meeting more people, being loved in return by friends that you make, by people that you love romantically. But in the case of this story, she didn't have that. So she had to do her steps out of order. But that got her to this point where she could love herself. She didn't
Yeah,
have to love herself before she could love anyone else. You can love with damage, and that love from loving other people can empower you to feel differently about yourself because you're getting out of your head.
exactly. And again, this is just shows you. I mean, we've been talking about this show for almost over an hour at this point, and we've barely touched the surface. And so we will wrap it up. And again, I just highly encourage you to go and watch it because I don't think we're really doing it justice in many ways. But she does finally, as we end, have her Cinderella moment, if you will.
She shows up at a party and everyone is dressed in the Western style, and it's her Cinderella ball gown moment, and it's amazing. You just have to go watch it. It's actually after the credits in the
Mm-hmm.
12th episode of season one.
Yeah, I think Marvel has conditioned us to stay for post credit scenes.
Marvel is dead to me. But outside of that controversial take, before we leave and before we get to our conclusion, I want to jump into the Cinderella theme just a touch. I truly believe, as I have been talking about this episode through the lens of the girlies, that the Cinderella story arc is a female empowerment story. Revenge fantasy for women is a popular genre, whatever you may think about that. A lot of stories for women these days have a female assassin or something like that. That's a female power fantasy.
Yeah.
But what I think is different about the Cinderella story arc, it's different from the popular power fantasy of today because it's almost like the power of forgiveness fantasy. Mio, don't get me wrong, the people who did her wrong get their comeuppance, as they
Yes.
should. But
But she's not the one who did it.
yes, she never loses her ability to love. In fact, she gains it. She never loses her kindness, her care for others. That's what remains.
I think there is something to be said about having a story that has good moral lessons that you can take from it. Like I love morally great characters too. Like we can have a place for we don't have to have exclusively one or the other. But there are so many lessons you can take from this story. While it's often not very fun, there is something to taking the high road, if you will. And she does. In the end, like she's the one who has the happy ending.
None of the people who abused her really face legal ramifications, and they're all alive. But what she has is peace, a good life,
And a
love.
happy marriage.
Exactly.
Just to bring up one more point is that we kind of talked about with Anastasia. Once again, we have a story that uses a historical setting, and I think that's a really fun way to introduce people to history. It's kind of like an access point to learning about Japanese culture, which I find fascinating, and I'll be honest, I don't know that much about.
Obviously, with anime, you get people who get weird about Japan, but I think that there's also a positive to that. And you're right, it can get you more interested in a history that we don't learn that much about in our schools.
As we wrap everything up here, we want to hear from you guys as well. Like, what stories have you been exploring this week? And, do you have any suggestions for us? Leave us a comment, let us know. And we have plans, but we are flexible because we are chill. If you have a story that you think we should get into, we will probably check it out.
In the meantime, please join us for next episode's exploration of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Stephanie will reveal just how fanatical she is about film scores.